it's not all about Brexit. And I think we were trying to make the point, and asking questions of people at counts, what were the factors in this campaign? Was it all about Brexit? What were the particular local issues? Why are some of these independent groups surging ahead in such an impressive way? John is with us again. John Curtis. Hi, John.
Hello.
The surge for the independents, which is notable. What can you tell us about that?
Well, what I can tell you is that on average in our key wards where the independents were fighting, they were getting as much as 25% of the vote. Has to be said, however, no obvious pattern. I can't tell you they were doing particularly well in Remain areas or Leave areas, or particularly well in areas against the Conservatives or necessarily against Labour. So to that extent, at least, it is very patchy, but evidently, certainly, where there were already independents that were reasonably well established, they've managed to increase their support. It's part of this broader piece whereby, frankly, it's anybody but Conservative or Labour that seems to have been able to make progress tonight.
Other patterns, if they are there, John, just because we've been talking at length, really, about voter motivation.
Yeah.
Again, we're 89 councils down and 159 to go. So, we're past the halfway, but we're quite a lot to go. Trends there in terms of what you can pick up in terms of the way that different parts of England have voted overnight.
Well, I think there's two patterns that we would pick up, at least as far as Conservative and Labour is concerned. The first is that there is this north-south pattern. It looks as though the Labour Party has gone back most heavily in the north, the Conservative Party has gone back most heavily in the south, and of course these are the areas within which those two parties respectively tend to be relatively strong, and that fits a wider pattern whereby even at the ward level it looks as though wards where Labour was starting off relatively strong, Labour went back rather more. Wards where the Conservatives were relatively strong, the Conservatives went back more, which again just seems to fit this wider story that basically where a party was the incumbent, where a party is in an area where relatively strong, it is that party from which the voters are defected, and it seems to be part of this general plague on your houses syndrome. And I guess we shouldn't perhaps have been quite so surprised as we were. We've perhaps all been slightly blindsided by the drama of the Conservatives' difficulties, the collapse in the Conservative vote in the recent polls, and the rise of Nigel Farage. But the truth is, on the other side also, the Labour Party vote has been quite clearly falling in the opinion polls. It's not necessarily been falling particularly amongst Remainers or particularly amongst Leavers. It's been falling amongst both, and indeed we're seeing tonight, it's not obvious that the Labour vote's particularly going down more in Remain areas than in Leave areas or vice versa. It's just simply that, just remember that very, very simple rule of electoral politics. Voters don't vote for divided parties. And of course, one of the remarkable things about Brexit and about our current politics is that both our major parties are divided. Usually, at any one point in time, one or other of them, yes, get themselves into a bit of a muddle, but at least the other one seems to be able to present a reasonable face to the electorate. I think the lesson they need to both take away is that, frankly, neither of them are operating very effectively when it's persuading the electorate that they're capable of providing this country with effective government.
Very succinctly put, John, and thank you very much. We'll put that to the panel. John Curtis there for us. What I'd like to do before I do another little chat with the panel here is to go to South Gloucestershire, and I think Pete is there, Pete Simpson. I can see them clearing up, Pete, so why don't we talk to you before they throw you out and ask you what the story is there.
Well, I'd like to say it was worth the wait here, Hugh, but unfortunately it wasn't, rather, in terms of excitement and interesting stories. If you like your politics mildly dull, then South Gloucestershire certainly has traditionally been the place to be, and so it's proven tonight. This is an authority that represents the kind of urban, rural northern edge of Bristol, as well as the southern part of the ceremonial county of Gloucestershire, so it's quite split in terms of rural and urban. There was a Conservative majority here. They were defending a majority. They were very anxious and nervous at the start of the evening. They thought that that might have slipped away from them, but as it's proved, they have held on to their majority. Only slightly, they lost a couple of seats to the Liberal Democrats. And yes, so the Conservatives have ended the evening very happy because, as I say, they were worried. They've changed the boundaries slightly. There's fewer councillors than there were before, but the candidates, as they troop off into the morning light, the Conservatives ones are pretty happy. The Liberal Democrats were hoping to make gains here. In fact, there aren't any Liberal Democrat candidates here. They split the count into 3 different parts of South Gloucestershire. Their heartlands is more in the northern part of South Gloucestershire. They gained a couple of seats, but that was really it for them. So the Conservative Party remain in control of South Gloucestershire, and they're very relieved to have done so.
Just a thought, if I can, Pete, as well, about the nature of the campaign over the last few weeks.
Yep.
You know, what have party workers been coming up against in terms of reaction on the doorstep?
Yeah, reaction on the doorstep. Actually, there was one incident. There are a couple of incidents around the country. There was one incident in South Gloucestershire where one of the Conservative members was actually physically attacked. That was reported to Avon and Somerset Police, and they are investigating. In terms of, you know, the actual politics, of course, Brexit was a huge issue here. South Gloucestershire is somewhere that kind of followed the national vote insofar as that it just voted in a very slim way for leave. And of course, they were very worried that they were going to receive the backlash, as we've seen in many other parts of the country this evening. It hasn't proven as such. They've also made cuts, of course, South Gloucestershire Council, tens of millions of pounds over the last 4 or 5 years. But of course, they've done so in a manner that voters seem fairly happy with at the moment in South Gloucestershire. And as I say, they're very relieved this morning, the Conservatives, that they've managed to hold on to their majority.
Pete, good to talk to you. Thank you very much. And Pete Simpson Thursday in South Gloucestershire at 26 minutes past 5. So we have 90 councils declared with 158 to go, and we have about 2,500 seats declared, individual councillors who've been elected, with just under 6,000 to go. So lots of counting and lots of declaration still to come on this Friday. Counting will go on in the morning. In lots of places in England, they'll be starting to count at 9 o'clock. So we'll have lots of results coming in late morning and over lunch, and our coverage will be continuing then, of course. But in the meantime, let's ask Rita for a kind of summary of the key results so far.
The story of the night has been of the Conservatives and Labour losing seats and councils to smaller parties and independents, and also of the Liberal Democrats taking seats and some councils off the Conservatives. So this screen gives you a good summary of what has happened overnight. Cotswold, which was Conservative, went Liberal Democrat. The Conservatives lost Folkestone and Hythe. That is now in no overall control. St Albans, that was a Conservative council, and that has now become no overall control. And if we just go into St Albans, I can show you a bit more detail of what happened. There you can see the Liberal Democrats, the largest party with the Conservatives on 23 seats. And if I just show you the change in the share of the vote there, you can see what's happened. The Liberal Democrats going up to 19% of the share of that vote, the Conservatives losing 13%, and Labour also losing 4%, the Greens gaining 4% there. Let me take you back to the main screen. There's better news for the Conservatives in Walsall. They gained that council from no overall control. And also North East Lincolnshire was a Conservative gain from no overall control. Ashfield was a bad news story for the Labour Party. That went from no overall control to independent. A group of independents have taken Ashfield Council, which will have been a difficult moment for Labour. Wirral also went from Labour to no overall control. And I want to show you what happened here. So although Labour remain the largest party with 32 seats and the Conservatives on 22, let me show you what happened to the share change. Isn't that interesting? I think I've got a seat change there. Let me just take it back again. There you go. That's what I wanted. Labour on minus 13% of the share. And look what's happened to the Greens there. They've gained plus 12% of the share. So they'll be very happy with that. And I'll take you back to my big screen one last time. One good gain for Labour, one prominent gain for Labour this evening has been Trafford, which they will have been very happy about.
Rita, thanks very much. And I suppose when we look at that range of results, and we start with the Conservatives, Marcus, we can, you know, there are some pockets where, you know, you've had some rather promising outcomes. But if we look, for example, at Bath, and if we look at because we've now got the final figures in from Bath and North East Somerset, let's take a look at these figures from Bath, because they're worth looking at. And they are, of course, a Lib Dem gain from the Conservatives. If you look at these figures, they're pretty telling. 37 to the Lib Dems, 9 to the Tories, 7 to Labour, 6 to the Independents. Look at the change from last time. The Lib Dems gaining 23 seats and the Tories losing 24 seats. And that was, you know, that was the notable interview that we conducted earlier with the former leader, the Conservative, who basically said, look, we're absolutely fed up to the back teeth with not being able to talk about issues which are important to us locally because of what's going on at Westminster. And I suppose, Marcus, that result in Bath is a bit of an emblem of the night for you. I was saying you've got some pockets of success. You know, yes, of course you have, but the result there in Bath and the reasons for it, because we spoke to your former leader there, are very clear. Which is that, you know, people and your own party workers have lost faith in what's going on.
Well, clearly there's still a lot of results to declare, but for a governing party after 9 years, you would expect us to be losing far more seats than we are. When the Blair-Brown government had 9 years, they had lost 3,500 seats. And before today, we lost 500 seats over that period. So I think we need to put that into context. But clearly the results we've had in Bath and North East Somerset are disappointing. But I would say, going back to what I said before, the last time these seats were contested, we actually won these parliamentary seats with massive majority in North East Somerset, a very respectable majority in Bath. And the reason for that was that clearly we ran a good campaign, but the Lib Dems absolutely collapsed. So the Lib Dems were at a very low point. Last year, they were at their lowest point in council seats for 40 years. So this sort of resurgence, I think, was expected. But I think
to that extent,
what the challenge is the frustration of people, and that's the frustration not just of Conservatives, but also a lot of other voters who wanted Brexit and they want it delivered. And as I say, there's been a number of opportunities to do that, and it's quite interesting because that, you know, whilst we're suffering some difficult results, we've also had some really good results. Yeah. You know, we won seats in the Wirral, North East Lincolnshire Council we've taken tonight. When you look at some of the other smaller results, but important ones, in Bolsover, we've won a seat. The first time we've won a seat in Bolsover since 1987. So I think when you look at it, it is far more nuanced than you say, Hugh. And I think the public, if there's a message coming out of this set of results tonight, is, I think, rather than whether they'll leave or remain, it's far more nuanced and they want certainty.
I think Marcus Jones is a man relieved, frankly, because the Conservatives were looking at overnight what they thought might be much worse than this picture. Big health warning.
It's an ongoing process.
It's an ongoing process,
it's
and
still
it
early
may
on.
well seem very much worse for them tomorrow. But where he is right is that at this stage, traditionally in the electoral cycle, I know I keep banging on about this, but if we look at this huge set of elections as telling us anything about the future, at this stage in the electoral cycle, a government that had been in power for so long would have expected to lose many, many more seats by now. But clearly, they're being punished by the divisions in their party over Brexit that the Prime Minister has not been able to manage successfully.
And that's about coming back to numbers.
Well, and leadership and all sorts of other things.
But if you look at the Labour Party, they should be piling on votes. They should be winning in Swindon, North Warwickshire, and they shouldn't be shipping votes across the north.
I love that every single Conservative spokesman has had a very strong view about Labour's performance. Why is that, do you think?
Well, occasionally, I could reveal to our viewers who are still with us at 5:35, occasionally politicians are given a script.
No, not Marcus. Definitely not.
Not Marcus, not Leo, not Shan. I'm sure none of them have been on tonight.
Some of my language is long on a script.
Just to take on, just to take on where you are now.
Well, I think as has just been said, we're only a third of the way through in terms of the counting and the seats coming in, and we may see a picture changing as the day progresses. But clearly there have been local issues at play, where there have been independents, for example, and those will have been played out very much on on very, very local issues. We, of course, were very pleased to have taken Trafford, a very highly contested council, and one that obviously we're pleased to have, and doing well in Plymouth, where again there was a very contested and difficult situation of the last few years.
But at this stage, from a third of the results, we're nowhere near the end, but it's a significant chunk of people's votes being recorded.
Yes.
Does this look to you, honestly, like a set of results that could see Jeremy Corbyn on the march to number 10?
Well, certainly.
Genuinely.
In some seats, like Plymouth Moorview and Swindon South, for example, Thurrock, these are seats that on what we've seen tonight would actually be
But as a
gains for us
set
in a
of
parliamentary election. But I think it's very, very difficult to compare what happens locally, where people are looking very much at local issues, and what would happen in a general election, where clearly it's much more likely that they're going to vote for a bigger party because of the electoral system. Whereas perhaps in a local election it can be a very strong personality. There can be all sorts of reasons why people might choose to experiment and choose to do things differently.
Or year-round hard work by a good team. What John Curtis was talking about earlier on was he was looking at the overall vote share and the overall changes in vote share. And I think that might be one way to try and even out what's going on here with the different councils. Because just saying it's nuance and local issues to different councils doesn't make a lot of sense. But it could reflect, for example, the Conservatives on the ground, I do not see them being young and active and knocking on doors and doing all that local campaigning.
You want to come to my constituency?
That you do. Well, we.
Not that I'm that young.
And I've been to a lot of places where we're challenging sitting Conservative councillors, and they're just not doing that work. And I think there's a genuine problem with the Conservatives on the ground, and that would show up if you were to look at overall vote share across the country. And the other thing about overall vote share is, we're all very excited about getting more seats in Trafford, but when you showed the vote share in Trafford earlier on, we should be getting maybe 15 councillors in Trafford. If you were looking at genuine representation, we should be holding the balance of power on a lot more councils than I think just 2 or 3, as we will be at the end of
When you ran a council, it was a shambles in Brighton.
We had a majority. Thanks for bringing that one out. When we had minority control of Brighton Council, we won awards for our transport work, for our work on sorting out the town centre, for our work with small businesses.
What about the bins?
And you've got the bins there, and the bins was a problem trying to sort out an equalities issue that the Labour Council had just left on the shelf for years and years. This was equal pay between men and women, and they waited and waited to sort it out, Labour, and they handed it over to the Greens, and they made an enormous thing out of it, but so much went right under the Greens. And we'll be interested to see what happens in Brighton tomorrow. And the other one that's really interesting, just to finish off, is Solihull, where the Greens are the official opposition. We've been growing and growing and growing on that council for years now. We've got a lovely big group of councillors, and we could be doing very, very well in the next election and in this election. And I think if you're saying, it's different for Conservatives and what about Brexit, Solihull's a really interesting place to look at, because it is basically just Conservatives versus Greens, and it'd be really interesting to see how that works out.
And I do think that the focus on climate change over the past fortnight has given a boost to the Greens.
I think it's probably boosted overall, like I said earlier, probably boosted overall vote share, but the places where we go across the line in first past the post, which is really hard for us. That's only done through incredibly hard local work, because that's how we win. We can't take any votes for granted, the way that so many Conservative and Labour councillors
yeah,
have
and
done.
what you can do is very often promise the earth, because you never have to deliver in many instances. You know you're not going to hold power. You know you're not going
That's
to
a fair
actually
point,
have
yeah.
to make the difficult decisions.
Well,
Agreeing there. Did you notice that?
Well, we'd love to be able to do those, because we've got absolute confidence in our policies. And when we sit there on council, even if there's just 1, 2 or 3 of us, we can make a real difference to the way councils do things, the way they run things. We put forwards ideas that nobody else is. We can be an absolute breath of fresh air to a council that's got stale, got boring, and started to take its voters for granted.
Can I have a look at Hinckley and Bosworth? Because this is interesting. Because this is where the Lib Dems may well be on course for taking over this council. This is 18 seats so far to the Lib Dems in Hinckley, 11 to the Tories and 2 to Labour. Let's look at the change, because this is going to tell us the story. Lib Dems putting on 9 seats in Hinckley and Bosworth. The Tories down 10. Labour up 1, and then no other changes. So Hinckley and Bosworth, you know, looking very, very good for the Lib Dems, who will be running that authority from now on. So a good result for them. So on that Lib Dem theme, let's ask Rita to take us through the main Lib Dem gains so far.
Here they are, Hugh. Bath and North East Somerset just come in. That is a big Lib Dem gain. I'll take you into those details in just a moment. And earlier, in the earlier hours, we had Cotswold and Winchester, all 3 councils taken from the Conservatives by the Liberal Democrats, and just North Norfolk, which had been in no overall control, now Liberal Democrat. Let me just show you the details of the results in Bath and North East Somerset. Now, this had been a Conservative council. The Conservatives had a majority of 7. Look how that's changed. Liberal Democrat majority of 15, with the Lib Dems taking 37 seats compared to the Conservatives' 9. And if I just show you how the seat change has worked here, the Liberal Democrats have gained 23, the Conservatives have lost 24, so almost a complete straight swap there. So a very striking result for the Liberal Democrats there in Bath and North East Somerset.
Rita, thank you very much. OK, Laura, but if you're sitting in Downing Street, you know, ready to have breakfast, you know, not it's only 20 to 6, maybe at 6 o'clock, 6:30.
Perish the thought.
Perish the thought. And, you know, you're looking ahead to the rest of the day, because there's lots more to come. And you could end up in a position which, you know, is noticeably worse than losing 330. How does that change the dynamics of the way that Mrs May is trying to manage what is already a fractious party?
Well, it may, if it ends up being a lot worse than it appears right now, it may yet, as we've already seen from Priti Patel, stir up again another sense that people might try to oust her in short order. Now, our expectation is that that probably won't happen again until after the European elections. But if things change very much in the next 12 hours, you could once again see a stoking of the fire. And I certainly expect, if with any set of results, just because elections sort of create a moment, that we will hear over the next day or so more articulation of unhappiness with her. The more interesting thing for me really is whether both party leaderships, they might not want to admit it publicly, but look at this sort of 2 fingers up to both of them from the electorate and say, actually, we really have to try harder to make this work in terms of them being able to find a cross-party compromise on Brexit. Now, that's hugely risky for both of them inside their own parties, and also maybe with some voters. And I don't think we can say tonight whether or not the message of support going to the Lib Dems and the Greens is either stop Brexit or get on with Brexit, or we've had enough of both of you.
One of the issues, of course, Laura, and I'll bring John in on this as well, is, you know, you start looking at these figures, and then, of course, the natural thing in Westminster terms is to look at projections in terms of Westminster seats. OK, that again is a tricky area to be in, but it's one of the areas that is of interest to us. John, I know you've been looking at this as well. What can you tell us about the results so far and the possible impact on Westminster patterns?
Well, one of the things, as you know, we've been doing throughout the night, Hugh, is collecting the detailed ward-by-ward results across 40 council areas, and that therefore means that for some parliamentary constituencies, we can now tell you which party was ahead and whether or not, therefore, the party that was ahead on Thursday, yesterday, is different from the party that won in 2017. Now, I think Laura earlier in the programme quoted from Labour sources some examples of where the Labour Party was ahead and their constituencies that they didn't win in 2017. Well, I'm afraid I've got a little list of constituencies where the Conservatives were ahead on Thursday, but Labour were behind. They're Bolton North East, Bury North, Derby North and Wirral West. So given that the Labour Party still has to make quite a substantial advance to have any prospects winning the overall majority, it's not the kind of results that suggest the Labour Party were heading that direction. But before the Conservatives get too cocky, and to confirm that indeed we've been seeing some evidence of the Liberal Democrats reviving in some of the places where they had strength but recently fell back, I've got another list of 4 seats. They're seats where the Liberal Democrats came first, which the Conservatives have been holding hitherto. Cheadle, Stockport, Hazel Grove, Portsmouth South, all of them, of course, constituencies that the Liberal Democrats held either till 2015 or in the case of Southport until 2017. Now, yes, Liberal Democrats always do better in local elections than in general elections, but it's an indication that in these places, perhaps, there is a prospect of a Liberal Democrat revival that might mean that some of these constituencies might be taken back by the party in a forthcoming general election.
Well, that's an interesting prospect, isn't it? Any of those surprising you, John?
No, not to be honest. I mean, given the pattern of the results tonight, whereby, yes, the Labour Party has been making ground more, especially in the south of England, that list of Labour constituencies I've given you was not particularly southern. There were, Bolton, Bury and the Wirral are all in the north of England, and that fits the wider pattern. And yeah, sure, given that we've been discovering that the Liberal Democrats have been tending to do better in those places where they already had a degree of strength, these are the kind of places where you'd expect the Liberal Democrats to come back first. But, remember, one of the crucial patterns of tonight has been Conservative loss, Labour loss of councils as well as seats, very little in the way of Conservative gains and Labour gains, while insofar as the Liberal Democrats might, in an early general election, be able to win more seats. Given the evidence from Scotland, and here we have to rely on the opinion polls, that the SNP aren't going anywhere outside of Westminster anytime soon, I think everybody who keeps on arguing, well, maybe the way out of the Brexit impasse is to have another general election, should remember that perhaps there's a non-trivial probability that we would end up with another hung parliament. And frankly, whether it's a hung parliament in which we either have a Labour or a Conservative Prime Minister, it might prove to be a parliament that is incapable of reaching a decision about Brexit as the current one.
It's a cheerful conclusion.